Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stargate and Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer for today's show is Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter. And you're listening to Revolution Radio, Studio B. And our guest today is Marty Rosenblatt. And I'll tell you a little bit about Marty, and then we'll bring on Dr. Lessin. So Marty has an MS in physics from UCLA. He worked for 35 years in areas of high-energy physics using computational technologies. He is currently the president of the Applied Precognition Project, APP, and a nonprofit known as APPI, dedicated to education and development of precog pros. These are the natural follow-up to physics institutions applications, which he founded in 1998, to apply remote viewing to predicting financial markets and sporting event outcomes. They're doing it, playing the market and the games. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Marty?
I think it's wonderful to be able to predict outcomes. Let's learn some more.
So, Marty, welcome to our show, and we have a lot to cover today. We haven't talked to you in over a year, it seems. So how have you been doing, and what's new in your life?
Doing well. Thank you for having me. And we're still precogging, and we have this new program that is getting more and more active, which is called Precog Pros for Precognitive Professionals. And I'll tell you more about that later if you ask.
We'd love to hear about it. How does one become a precog pro? What do you have to get paid for it, or a certain skill level?
Right. You have to demonstrate a skill level. And if you go to our website at appliedprecog.com, there's a tab there for Precog Pros, and it'll give you all the details. But basically, you need to show about a 65 to 70% hit rate on either the sports or financial predictions. And then we bring you into the program and we pay you based on your performance.
Wow. So you can see if you're naturally a precog. And do you get a score? Like you're only somewhat psychic, you're very psychic. Is there like a rating system?
What we use is what called the hit rate chart. And we have charts, and we save everything on our server, including comments that your analyst puts in. We use what's called associative remote viewing. But the hit rate chart is simply hits divided by hits plus misses. So we do, like with sports, we do predictions of over and under, which are basically 50%. And if your hit rate chart is showing you up at 65 to 70%, we're happy to bring you into the Precog Pro program where you can earn money, but then also we will invest on your predictions and the other Precog Pro predictions.
Wow. Well, back in the 90s, I used to work over in Oakland and in Pittsburgh, and this guy had these little cards, and he'd say, hey, pick the winners for me. It was all sports stuff. Mm-hmm. And I would, go to the office, and when I was going to get my car at the end of the day, I'd give him his thing, and he kept winning. So I tried to do it for myself, and I kept losing. So whenever I did it for somebody else, I could pick the right teams. What's that about? Any idea?
This whole area is so complicated. When you do it for yourself, your subconscious may be concerned about greed and money and things like that. But come join our program. If you were that good, you can do this in a way where it looks like you're doing it for somebody else. You're doing it for app. So you might take a look at appliedprecog.com. I'd love to have you if you were that successful.
I hadn't even thought about it until we're talking now. Yeah. Go ahead, Sasha.
Well, I just wonder if you can do a precog on your association, what if you were going to say what do Marty think about the likely thing that everyone else is going to come out on this given sports event, who's going to knock out whom, or which horse is going to win, or something? Can you do that, or do you have people that's their target, which is the collective?
Yes, we have groups. We have 3 sporting groups and 10 financial groups. The Precog pros are all financial, so I can basically invest or wager, however you look at it, in the market. But of the 3 sporting groups, one, in fact, is a horse racing group. And the other 2, the group managers, were organized in groups of people, and the group manager chooses whatever they want. And, they choose things like, guess what? The Super Bowl. They choose things with the horse races, whatever the big horse races are. So, yes, we cover lots of sports, and every day we do financial prediction as well, basically on the Standard & Poor 500, but derivatives with it, options, or the it's called an ES. It's a commodity future, and that's because we're in and out when we wager in and out in a day. We don't hold any financials overnight.
Wow. I used to have a client who had a guy he always asked, how should I bet? Because this guy always lost money. And so he always would check out to make sure that he wasn't betting with this guy, because this guy always lost.
Well, let me just say, the always, in my experience, is never. We have people who get up to 65, 70%, but to have somebody for 100% over, we use sort of as our long-term measure, 25 predictions. We've never had anybody get 25 hits in a row. Now, sometimes they're passes, but ignoring passes, to get 25 hits in a row, that's pretty close to always in our minds. Never seen that.
Yeah.
Had one guy who had 16, but that's not been reproduced. So this idea of when people tell you they're always right or always wrong, I think that's an exaggeration. It might be the field.
Yeah.
But we keep exact statistics. That's a very important part of what we do.
So, Marty, how did you get into it? What's your background?
Well, as you said, I'm a physicist, but I've always been interested in science fiction, going back, to pre-high school days. And, science fiction, and also listening to the tales you hear about these yogas that do all these strange things. And I just, always had an interest in that. You hear enough of it that you begin to say, maybe there's something to it. But until I got aware of this thing called remote viewing and the Monroe Institute, it was all, I was agnostic about it. But then I started really investigating it, and there's all kinds of data out there in precognition, and that's when I started physics intuition application. And when you see some of the results, there's no doubt that precognition, connecting up with the future, is real. There's just no doubt about that. And science, in fact, has proven that for sure. When you have a precognition of a certain kind, or especially if your powerful group does, are you possibly affecting the outcome by your putting your consciousness there? Turns out that's a good and very subtle question, because the basis of consciousness is this very now moment. And when you do precognition, you personally, with your now moment, you do a remote viewing session. Say we use photographs. We call them photo sites because you can pick up smells and all kinds of stuff from it that you might not pick up in a photograph. But your now moment then gets connected with the feedback session day later, say, and that's another now moment. Those now are entangled. The future now moment connects back with the original remote viewing session in time. In fact, that's called retrocausality. So the two are entangled. They are influencing each other. Cause and effect is going both ways. But is anything changed? I mean, this is just what happens. And the influence is definitely there. And I think that's as far as we should go. Consciousness
there's another step, though, because your confidence is growing. You're changed by your success rate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you get, first of all, things like your belief system changes totally. You know, the world is not one that runs in a linear forward time. You know, causes and then effects are later in time. Yeah, that's true. But it turns out cause and effect can go backwards when viewed from linear time. And that's a major paradigm shift for a lot of people to absorb. But they do it. Once they get a few of these remarkable sessions, they recognize that there's more to this universe and consciousness than we normally give credit to.
Yeah. What I like it is the somatic anchoring. If it's truth, I'll get a feeling, you know, gut feeling or
that's right.
Up my spine, and then the more you notice your body having those somatic responses to information, the more accurate you get.
I totally believe that. Paying attention to self and looking for information coming from what I call the subconscious. Other people might call it a higher conscious. Other people might call it from guides, whatever. We know there's something deeper than the normal intellect ego self. And there's nothing wrong with that. The ego self gets us through the physical world. But there's a non-physical world. There I call it a spiritual world. Your soul, something deep within you, has the connection with the future. It has the connection with all the psychic phenomena that are real and that happen. It's coming from this very deep part of yourself. And listening for that and learning to hear its subtle ways of communicating, which definitely includes the body, but it also includes surprise images or surprise words seemingly coming out of nowhere. And that's what we look at when we do this remote viewing and associative remote viewing. People are learning to do that, and it extends to other parts of their lives because I believe, in fact, that's the most important work that we're doing, is getting people to listen to a deeper, higher stuff from the Akashic records, stuff from what Inga Swan called the Matrix, what I'm calling the universe of collective consciousness, which includes all now moments, past, present, and future.
Go ahead, honey.
Well, this is kind of abstract, but when you look beyond the specific, whether this horse is going to win or this politician is going to win, to the systems that you're dealing with, the horse racing system, the pro football system, or whatever it is there any kind of sense you get about that whole thing and how that works and your part in that industry?
Yeah, first let me say this is absolutely theoretical, what I just said. As a physicist, when I got into this, I almost had no choice but trying to get down to the deepest levels of this. And it turns out consciousness is fundamental, is as deep as you can go. And the guys who started quantum mechanics said that as well. But then once you get down there, what do? You have to do applications. So now it becomes very practical. And we have set up this completely online system. So we have people from all over the world that use this online system. And then they interact with horse races. They interact with over-under wagers. They interact with will the Standard & Poor's 500 move up or down a certain amount of points because we use stop and limits. And that's the practical part where they are indeed connected at a very practical, non-theoretical level.
Wow.
This is a wow.
It is a wow. Could you feed all the variables into a supercomputer? Like, here's all the horses, and here's all the jockeys, and all that they've done thus far, and then have predictable outcomes of what they might do in the next race. Is that something that anybody's ever tried? Putting all the variables in.
Oh, yeah. People try that all the time. Handicappers do that all the time. And when we do, let's think over-under for now, just because it's easier. When there's a football game, and the over and under might be 45.5 points. And they put the half in there because the bookmaker, we used to call them bookies, are willing to take a wager either over that or under that. Now, they do an awful lot of homework to come up with what is a 50-50 wager. Now, there are other people out there that are doing their homework, and they say, you know what, with everything that's going on, my theoretical model says it's going to be over 45.5, so they'll wager on over. But guess what? There are other people's models who say under. And as far as I know, and this is true in the financial markets also, over the long term, there are no models that are really that good. For the financial markets, there were some guys that were making a lot of money for a year or two, and then they totally flopped. And that was totally analytical. So it's complicated. I mean, you've got people trying to beat the market, to beat the sports events, and everybody has their own approach. And our approach is brand new, and we're trying to break out in a financial way. And I have to tell you, and you're probably not going to believe this, but it's true. We want to communicate to society, educate society, that this idea of precognition, other side phenomenon, are in fact real, because we want to contribute to a paradigm shift in that area. I mean, I think you guys know psychic phenomenon are real, but science certainly doesn't accept it. And most people will think it's random. It isn't something you can apply. And so that's sort of the goal we've taken on, to demonstrate that you can apply it relatively consistently. We're not looking for 100%. We're looking for 75 to 80%. We bring people in at 65 to 70%, hoping then that they'll get better, and we do everything we know how to make them better. But basically, it becomes inner work. It's an inside job, if you will. And we're working with these people, and they're motivated to, in fact, get better and better. And we are indeed seeing that, but it's not as rapid as we would have both hoped and liked. And yet we're going to stay with it until we get there.
Are you guys doing the who's going to win the Democratic nomination and who's going to win the presidency?
Funny you should say that. We have most of our predictions are put out with notice of like 5 days. And so it then goes off and it's 1 day. So that's our kind of short time period. However, once a month, we have a free webinar, and it's a learn by doing webinar. And we actually have people do predictions. And our last question was, will Joe Biden win the Democratic nomination? So we did take that one on. I think the answer was pass. I just can't even remember now. But it could have been a yes or no. But we do take that kind of stuff on from time to time, which is longer term, really to investigate the longer term phenomenon. The problem with that is it takes a much longer time to get good statistics, as you would imagine, rather than getting one per week. And we do one actually every day with a week notice, so 5 days a week. Here you've got one a month. So if you like, hold on.
Are you associated with the at all? Are you working with the government? They've been doing this stuff for years. You know, the men who stare at goats. That movie.
Right. I am not directly involved with the government anymore. I used to work for the DIA as a consultant, and that's in fact how I found out about all this. And I met Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ at Stanford Research Institute. So that's what actually really prompted my interest, even before physics intuition applications. And that was in like early 1970s. And Russell Targ and I have done a lot of workshops together. Skip Atwater, who is the head of the Stargate program, so they were very heavily involved in this. He and I have done workshops at the Monroe Institute. I'm working now. I don't think there's any problem. Dale Graff, who used to be head of the Stargate. So I've kept up contacts, which over the years I've made with these people, but I have no formal connection whatsoever with the government anymore.
Tell us about the Stargate program.
Well, Stargate, and it had many names prior to Stargate, but they all were focused on remote viewing, the ability to gather information from a distance, where distance is both space and time. So they recognized very early, almost by accident actually, that they could pick up information from the future. And once that program got going and had some successes, and at the time, all of that stuff was secret or top secret. A lot of it now has been unclassified, and Ed May has published a lot of books on that now, huge volumes of work that went on then. But those programs did the kind of thing you would do. You know, we spied, if you will, gathered information from the Russians that they were trying to hide. The Russians were doing the same to us. So were the Chinese. Most of the governments of the world got involved in this. Enough of it was unclassified, though the specific operations were classified. But most governments in the world got involved with this, as far as I know. And they're just some wonderful examples of how well it worked and how important information was given to our government. And then eventually the government canceled it, at least publicly. And that was because there was a lot of resistance within the government. Some senators, for example, would say things like, even if this is true, I wouldn't believe it because it's the work of the devil. So there were a lot of negative attitudes, and I think that's what led to the cancellation of it. Do you want me to give you one?
You would want to know when the Iranians were loading up the missile with the nuclear head on it, and have remote viewers concentrating on that and stuff like that.
Yeah,
for
I don't
sure.
believe they really.
I know the
Mossad
didn't cancel it.
I don't think they really canceled it. I think they just went underground with it. So it's still there.
I hope that's true. Knowing how well it worked, and the important questions like you just outlined occur. I hope they are, in fact, using remote viewing in one fashion or another, even if, as you said, maybe they're getting it from other governments somehow or whatever. But yes.
Well, I wouldn't want the other parties in the world to get ahead of us. If they, I think they got into it because they found out the Russians were doing it, right? This goes back to the 50s or something. So,
there was a
they're
book
not
about.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. In fact, Skip Atwater, at least as far as I know, was the one who brought it to the attention of the people he worked for at Fort Meade, and the guy, and that was like from the Russian book, what is it? Psychic Phenomena Behind the Iron Curtain or something like that. And he brought it to their attention. And the guy said, "Oh, my God, I need to find out more about this." And Skip set up the program at Fort Meade. But there were a lot of other programs. Special Forces had programs. Other people had programs. This was quite relevant during the Cold War. Remember the Cold War? We were very worried about it. And so it was used by a lot of people then.
So what about the stories that they able to remote view the other planets, the moon and Mars, and they found alien bases even on the Earth and underwater, and then when you remote view and you're in somebody else's facility, they can see you. Somehow they can see your astral spiritual body, and so even though you're remote viewing and you're not in your physical form, you can trigger their alarms. And what about all those stories? What do you think of those?
Okay, let me talk about ETs. A lot of that stuff I absolutely believe has a high probability of being true. The fact that you can't get feedback is limiting factor, right? They see these bases, they saw stuff on Mars, and they took pictures of this stuff, and it pretty much agreed. But when you go back a million years and say the Martians were destroyed, which both Joe McMonagle and Tom McNear apparently saw similar things, it gives you some confidence that that might be true. I'll tell you one other thing that, that Lynn Buchanan, who was one of the people in the Stargate program, said in one of the webinars that workshops and stuff that I did and participated with him, he said when he did go to a meeting, he was asked to remote view, there was a Chinese guy there and they noticed each other. So again, there's evidence for what you just said. If you don't mind, I would like to use this as an opportunity to connect up with the recent disclosure of the ET. I've got to be very careful how we talk about this, but what apparently ET vehicles of some sort that move in ways which are kind of unbelievable. They make right turns, but no sonic boom, for example. That's the example I love. First time I saw that, it blew my mind. However, I would like to connect this up now with the fact that consciousness can apparently do this. Okay, now if you'll give me a moment to read something from, you may or may not know him, but he's worth looking up. Stephen Browdy. he wrote a book, Limits of Influence. And in it, he talks about St. Joseph of Cupertino. This is a guy, Browdy, who is just fascinated with these far out stories, but he checks them out. And this one happens to have a lot of supporting evidence. Okay, but let me read this to you because it connects up, I believe, with ETs. But not all Joseph's flights occurred indoors. Often they took place outdoors in broad daylight, where Joseph allegedly soared as much as 30 yards over the heads of onlookers to the branches of trees. Witnesses frequently commented that the branches would not ordinarily have been able to sustain his weight, that Joseph accordingly seemed to weigh no more than a bird. So he was not totally in the physical world, yet enough that they could see him. One curious and recurring observation is that during his flights outdoors, Joseph's clothing would not be disturbed by wind or his movement through the air. His robes were also reported to have remained dry in the rain. These accounts would appear to connect with reports that Joseph's flights indoors failed to extinguish nearby candles. So here's a case that goes way back, I don't remember exactly, 1700s, 1800s, something like that, where this guy reportedly, but many reports, enough that Browdy believed it was real, was observed to do things that you could not do in the physical world. And yet he could be seen. Sounds a lot like the, quote, some of the behaviors of the flying saucers, of the unidentified. Yeah.
It sounds like Moroni and Joseph Smith, for that matter.
What did Joseph Smith do? What's there?
Joseph Smith had a hologram talking to him, saying, there's this stuff, you better go dig it up, and all kinds of stuff, whatever. And it was an angel named Moroni, and it kept appearing to Joseph and saying the same thing. How come you keep saying the same thing? And the angel just said the same thing again.
And until he finally looked and found the appropriate book. Interesting. but there are a lot of cases like that. I have no doubt. Okay, now let me give you further speculation, but it certainly fits a lot of the facts. We know that there are ETs out there that are thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe 1 million years more advanced than us. And they have to have wrestled earlier in their development with this issue of consciousness. Okay, so once they found out that all the psychic phenomena was going on, what if they mastered it so much more than we have that it'd be unbelievable? Well, that means that telepathy, psychokinesis, the ability to manifest yourself in front of somebody, all of that stuff would be things that indeed they could do. When we see someone like St. Joseph of Cupertino doing it, I mean, that's a really special case. I don't know what was going on with him, but I believe he did it. But imagine a civilization who has really mastered that, and maybe they see us as being in kindergarten, and they're trying to broaden our perspective by doing the kind of stuff that they're doing. That's my perspective of when we see these phenomenon, and hey, we're talking about it. A lot of people are talking about it. I think it's all for education.
What about that yogi? What was his name from the 50s? A very handsome man with long. He was able to bilocate. He would be in one location, and then he was seen, 1,000 miles away in another location. Yogi, what's his name? Promenade. I don't know. I can never say the Indian words.
I don't remember his name either. However, Browdy, in one of his books, talks about several cases of that. And again, it turns out to be these often these saints who are often deep in prayer. Sometimes they flagellate themselves or something like that, which puts them in a different state of consciousness. But he has stories just like that, where a person is reporting him being in one place while everybody else sees him back in his normal place. Also, remote viewers bilocate. It's frequent enough that if you look up the remote viewing manual, they call bilocation, and they don't want people to do it because they get so entranced with really being in this place. It's so real that they stop giving the information they're supposed to be giving. It's just fascinating.
Well, I just want to share one more thing. When I was a child, I would see ghosts all the time, and they would appear at the foot of my bed, and they were annoying. They'd wake me up, and so I was having a series of seeing, and there was some different. One was my grandmother. Apparently, I found her picture later. I go, oh, that's that lady, and then suddenly I woke up, and it was daylight. It was like dawn, and there's my cousin from down the street. She lived 4 houses down from me. I'm going, wait a minute, this is weird. Ghosts, and then so can we maybe subconsciously bilocate, even though we're still alive and living, even though we're not trained and we're not even thinking about it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the issue of ghosts is a fascinating one, because I started out many, many years ago being agnostic about, life after death. I no longer am. The fact that the deep part of me and others can do precognition, retrocausality, that's not my normal ego body physical self. There's a non-physical self that is in me now, and guess what? It's there after my physical body dies. In fact, I believe it was there before I came into the physical world. And it'll be there after I leave the physical world. And ghosts are people who have not, I think, made the full transition, or people who are on, quote, the non-physical other side, who for whatever reason decide to show themselves to different people. We just don't understand all this, but these ideas that we can put out and talk about, I believe they all have a good probability of happening. But too many.
This is so much like in psychotherapy. We do a process where we have a person travel within their own body to a place which is troubling them within the body, and to converse with that place and touch it and to have it converse and so forth. But basically, to do exactly what you're saying you do with horse races, but within a person's body. Have you tried any applications like that?
I have personally. When I have like pains or discomforts, I no longer get headaches. I first started this with headaches. I'll focus on where the headache is and just keep focusing on it and describe it. And it changes and it always diminishes. It's sort of clear that you want it to go away or you wouldn't be doing this. And I do that with other parts of my body. And I'm now doing this whenever I have even unhealthy thoughts. I will stop and I will give that thought love and just be with it and give it love, knowing that love will make it integrate better for me in the long term.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's exactly what in psychotherapy we would do. We would say, what does the part of you that's distressing you now want? Why does it want it? What does it really need? And then when you start getting feedback on needs, you can address them in some kind of systematic way.
It's interesting because, yes, I've heard of that, and I've used that because stuff will come up with the pain. However, I really think, and I put this out in one of the webinars on our website, a free webinar, that this love approach may finesse all of that. If you can really get into a loving place, use something that just gets you feeling love. I happen to use a picture of myself looking at my first grandson. God, that love was just so real to me. And I'll look at that picture, bring love into me, and then whatever is sort of negative, I'll just simply share it with that. And I don't, if you're still doing this, you might experiment with that somehow. Can you give love to this thing which is disturbing you and recognize it's part of you? I mean, you're the one who's experiencing it. And why don't you make it okay and just give it love and let it integrate with the rest of you in a positive way?
Nice.
Wow. Yeah. So you're taking this that you've learned. So how did you get this far with this? So you started to study this. When did you start to study this and move into this as your main thing that you're doing in life? Or do you have a day job?
No.
Hobby?
I'm retired. I work harder at this, many hours at this than I did when I was working. This is now a passion. Probably 20 years ago, if you go to physics intuition applications, I wrote all kinds of things there as I was going here and learning. I'm investigating and I write. Anytime I do a webinar, I always push the limits of what I know. And in many ways, being not as successful as I liked is what led me, for example, to this love idea. I'm using it in the context of associative remote viewing. People, when they get their misses, get upset. I'm saying, when you feel that upset, give it love. It's part of the process. So I'm using this in the process of associative remote viewing, working to get more of my people to do this. So I'm actually trying it as well as I suggested for you to do, and I'm doing it in the context of associative remote viewing. I believe healthy people have an awful lot to learn about consciousness and how to apply it.
When a bunch of people do it together, are they more accurate than individual practitioners doing it in separation?
I'm sorry you asked that question, because the answer so far is no. That's been my challenge. I happen to be the group manager of all of the financial groups. And yes, some of them do better, but we're not up to the 70-75% level. They do a little better. And that's because we still, even with the Precog pros, have what we call missing streaks. Just how sports and everything you do, you might have these long hit streaks. And then I believe psychologically in this field, associative remote viewing, when people get a lot of hits in a row, part of them says this can't be true. I can't be this good. I can't be 100%. And then they start missing. And so as a group manager, when do you stop trusting the viewers who are doing well? And I'm working on that, and I'm looking at models to doing that. But so far, I have not been successful.
So I have a friend. He's known as the Wizard of Wall Street, And what he does when a person reaches that point is they have a group of people and they get down and they talk about their feelings. And what it comes down to is doing a psychological before you put your money down to make sure that you're not quarreling with your wife or upset about your car not working right, so it doesn't mess up your betting.
I think that's exactly the sort of thing which a person needs to do themselves to keep that winning streak going. Now, I could talk to them, but I wouldn't ask them so much about their wife. I'd ask them, what's going on inside? How are you feeling? Just because one of the key things in remote viewing is you set aside all the day-to-day stuff. You get into a place where you're, in principle, close to your subconscious, and your ego mind, your capital I intellect ego mind, is just there to write down a transcript. And these guys are good at that. They'll put together a good transcript, but sometimes it's just totally wrong. In associative remote viewing, we have two pictures, one which will be for over, one which will be for under. They'll only see the correct one that happens. Sometimes with remarkable precision, they will describe the other one, almost like they did it on purpose. But that's what I'm struggling with now.
Do you think they might be accessing different timelines or multiverses? It's alternative. Yeah. So they're still going down a direction, but they go slight variable on the theme to a different outcome.
That is we have so many hypotheses for it. The fact that it happens, sometimes they're too happy. When they get a miss, they do see how we scored it, so they'll know that they got a high score, so they might think, yes, I'm psychic. But I'm working to get them to the point where, no, that's a miss. What do you do to get the correct one with a much higher probability? You have to reduce those displacements. You remember the Duke University experiments. There was displacement there. After a while, the people would start getting accurate predictions of the one that was one ahead or two ahead, stuff like that. This is now a well-known phenomenon. We have not, like perhaps the ETs have, solved it yet.
What about working with psychics? Have you ever worked with real psychics that might be, using tarot cards or something else, and they have a higher probability of accuracy than someone else?
We've worked with some psychics, some even from the Stargate program, and they are, I don't want to use the word, they have the same problem, which is kind of remarkable. In fact, if I want to get paranoid, I can go past, which I don't want to do, past they doing it themselves on purpose because something deep in their own subconscious. But paranoia would say maybe there are ETs out there that say we're just not ready to get up to 75% or 80% hit rate. See, we don't know. All you can do is speculate, but we're going to work through it. We have people who are committed to working through this themselves. So this is not just me. I'm looking at it at the group level, but they're looking at it to improve their own precognitive retrocausality capabilities.
Do you think the government in their program, they're getting a higher level of accuracy? Or are they about the same?
I don't think they do ARV. In remote viewing, someone like Joe McMonagle, who publicly would look for missing persons. So it's not a 50-50 proposition, right? These are missing people who have been gone for decades sometimes. His hit rate on that, where he gives a transcript and then it's turned over to detectives. So he'll draw, cities and streets. And sometimes if they're dead, he'll say where the dead person is. His hit rate is 50%. Now, I consider that absolutely remarkable. So early on, when they worked at Stanford Research Institute doing what was called outbounders, they apparently were not 100%, but pretty close. So I don't know what the hit rate is now, but I presume it's better. I think it's good. I mean, I have no way of knowing how good, but I think it's good.
I just want to remind you, we're coming up on the break in 4 minutes. Okay. I had some people over the years that they said the government's trying to recruit me to go off and be in a program, and I'm afraid to join them because I might never be seen again. And so, and then suddenly I didn't hear from these people ever again. So,
well, I'm not paranoid about the government. The government is now in a disclosure with UFOs. I think they would be encouraging about remote viewing and things like that. I mean, they've already come out with it. So, I wouldn't, if somebody like that gets a call and they believe they're psychic, I would go for it. There's only one mysterious case that I've ever heard of where somebody, he died, and there's speculation that it might have been either the Russians or the U.S. We don't know. That's Pat Price. But that's the only negative story I've ever heard of.
That's good to hear.
My sister can sometimes remote view and see if a woman's got pregnant or not, and she's got a really
his sister one time was doing a session with 2 Hollywood actresses. She's in L.A., right? And she just said, "Oh, by the way, you're pregnant." And then she said to the other, "Well, and you're pregnant too." And neither had, missed a period yet, and they were pregnant.
Yeah. Hey,
you should have to contact you.
Don't you love those stories? They just show that psychic phenomenon is indeed real. And I think why we're having difficulty is we're bringing money into it. Most people have money issues, whether they know it or not. And so I think the standard remote viewing, find a missing person, hey, what's going on in the Iranian hostages with them? The remote viewers did a lot of work on that because that was relevant, back in Jimmy Carter's day. That I think they can do quite well. As soon as you get involved with money, I believe there are many subconscious issues that come up that have to be dealt with. And that's what we're working with our viewers on.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, people have limits on abundance that they impose upon themselves.
That's certainly what I was doing. So I couldn't win for myself. The music should be coming on any second now. What do you want to focus on in the second half?
Okay.
Break.
Well, we probably don't want to get too theoretical. I noticed you didn't like that. How about...
No, we can. We'll go anywhere.
Well, I have a model for all this that explains all psychic phenomena. It's this universe of collective...
I'd like to hear that. Oh, that sounds good to me.
Yeah. And then we can get into Joe McMonagle has a great example of a Russian submarine I can share with you. And then I just keep asking questions. I think, I'll give you my best understanding of whatever you ask.
Thank you so
We
much.
shall do
Very
that.
cool.
We're just waiting for the music. So when we come back, bottle.
You want me to turn off?
Yeah, just mute yourself.
I'm going to mute now.
Aloha and welcome back to Stargate Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Kier Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter. And you're listening to Revolution Radio Studio B. And our guest is Marty Rosenblatt. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to revolution.radio and go up to the link at the top left, which says donate, and make your donation. We do thank you very much for your donations. They are very much appreciated, and we need them to keep us going here. So thank you so much. What would you like to say, Dr. Lessin, before we bring back Marty?
Well, Marty, you're an expert on remote viewing, and so it brings to me, I think we're going to get into it, this thing, just what is a remote and what is proxemic? Is that a spurious dichotomy?
I hope you can hear me because I can't figure out how to unmute myself.
You're unmuted, and you can hear us, right?
I can hear you. It looks like I still have that dash through there. Okay, but I am unmuted. You can hear me.
We hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, we hear you. Good.
Okay, very good. Yeah, remote.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, remote versus proxemic, and is that a spurious, false dichotomy for something which is really a whole dimension?
Okay, there's something called locality and non-locality. Locality is things which emanate in a local fashion. When you see something, you're seeing it locally from light waves coming into your eyes. If I make a sound, you're hearing it that way. Remote viewing uses something which even Einstein didn't believe was possible, which is non-locality. You can get information at a distance where distance is space or time. You can get information from the other side of the world that's going on right now, and you can get information from the other side of the world that's going to happen a year from now. All of that is non-local. It's like instantaneous communication. And scientists have shown this in the physical world with photons being able to communicate faster than the speed of light, let's just say. That was what Einstein didn't believe, but we know that now to be true. That's what precognition shows. So the word remote indeed means non-local connections using non-normal senses. You're doing this in some deep way. I hope that answers your questions. Other dimensions may be information transport system, but all of that is sort of hypothetical.
Yeah. Well, the idea Caroline Corey and others have is that within everything there is a singularity where it is in contact with everything that is. In a holographic universe where everything is a fractal and they all resonate, if you find a place within any being, they can communicate without any passage of what we would call time or without any regard to what we call distance.
I agree with that. I have a model which pretty much says the same thing, but adds a physical way of doing this. Do you mind if I go into the model a little bit here?
I've been looking forward to it. Let's hear it.
Okay. This is called the UCC model, Universe of Collective Consciousness. It comes from the idea that consciousness is fundamental. the guys who struggled with all the strangeness of quantum mechanics said it first. So it's not like I made this up. They say things like, you cannot get behind consciousness. It's the most fundamental thing there is. So I took that seriously and came up with this idea of the UCC, which is the following. Imagine if every thought, every feeling you had, everything that's going on in your body that you're conscious of, okay? So you need to have this conscious element to it. But this includes past, present, and future conscious moments. It includes not only yours, it includes everybody else's on this planet. It includes everybody else's conscious moments anywhere in the universe. So anytime a sentient conscious being has a thought, has a feeling in their body, or an emotional feeling, all of those go through your consciousness. Okay? So this universe of collective consciousness contains all of that. The simplest way I put that is everything consciousness touches in any sentient being, past, present, and future. Okay? So that's the UCC. Now, this has a very important characteristic. It's got no boundaries. Because if you imagine, this is outside that. This is outside that. Well, as soon as you've thought about it, as soon as you've had a really unusual experience, guess what? It touched your consciousness. So this UCC has no boundary anywhere, inside, outside, no boundaries whatsoever. Now, the UCC just is there, right? It contains all this, past, present, and future. You, in one of your ads earlier, and it's just so beautiful, I wrote it down, and this is the next step here. Love of creation. How do you go from the UCC and create something in the physical world? That is a major mystery, but I have a hypothesis for that, which fits a little bit with what you were saying. There's something called zero-point energy, something called vacuum energy, and this is not controversial. All physicists now will acknowledge when you get down to the very, very, very small in any part of your body, as you said, or in where you think there's a vacuum, you go down to the very, very small, any place in the universe, any time in the universe, you have this vacuum energy, zero-point energy, like a base energy, which is as powerful as the energy involved in a nuclear explosion. So we are sitting on a well of energy. Now, imagine this moment, for example, which we're sharing. You're getting it from your perspective. I'm getting it from my perspective. This comes up from the UCC through the zero-point energy into the physical world. It's interacting with all, it's a holistic, it's a holographic kind of phenomenon, which then leads to a conscious moment. Now, a conscious moment was in the UCC. We experience it in the physical world. And it's a kind of a duality, if you will. And why the UCC ever did this, who knows? But it figured out how to do it. You know how I know? Because I'm here in the physical world. Let me just go a little bit further, and then you may want to ask questions on this. This is very theoretical, and yet it explains everything. It explains everything psychic. Precognition where I can get information from the future. Or the other way to look at it is the future can pass information to the past, retrocausality. Well, both of those events, right, a series of conscious events, conscious moments, are in the UCC. So they are entangled together at the UCC, and then they come up, each of them, through the zero-point energy field. Everything comes up through the zero-point energy field. The entanglement originates in the UCC. Souls. A soul, a person who has passed, his whole life story is what? It's a collection of all of his conscious moments. So when a loved one asks a psychic to get information that the person didn't even know, the psychic could be picking it up from his life story, which connected with, which is his, every conscious moment is a person's physical life story. But that's accessible through the UCC, and psychics do this all the time. Mediums do this all the time. Now, why a soul chooses to materialize as a ghost or maybe never passed over properly, I don't know. But the conscious experience of the ghost comes from the UCC. The person who was that ghost, all of his conscious moments are in the UCC, and he's able to materialize in some fashion. The detailed understanding of how that happens, in my opinion, goes no further than accepting that the UCC is there and that everything starts out being entangled with everything else, but at kind of a minimal level. They're just all there. And then each of us builds up our own conscious entanglements with all kinds of other stuff from the UCC. And sometimes that includes ETs. What better way to communicate than a telepathic connection where, and you have to realize this creation goes both ways, but if an ET were to talk to you, okay, any particular person, that would be a conscious entanglement, which came from the UCC. I think that advanced ETs have figured out how to work at the level of the UCC, make entanglements there, which then they bring up into the physical world. But sometimes they only bring him up partially into the physical world, like a aircraft, one of theirs that can make a right turn. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, go ahead. You have a question.
Well, the model's remarkable. It's so like the Jungian model in many ways. And one of the interesting things is when you would talk about pre-cognition versus post, that this already has built within it the assumption of causality, which is already a trapped system. And so ultimately, I think that your system goes away with duality. The wholeness of everything is right. is the awareness that's there, ever present. And also, I must say that in anthropology, my discipline, people converge on that view. It's called the perennial philosophy. No matter where they start with or whatever their symbols, or whether their society is technologically subservient to AI or not, they come to the same conclusion that there's a universe that's everything is connected to everything else, and it's playful and artistic, and all the separations are just spurious aspects of play, ultimately, and that you can have the experience of every level of consciousness without losing it. So when you transcend, say, your inner child, your inner child isn't gone. You still have a vulnerable inner child. It's just that it's subsumed under a ever-broadening perspective.
Yes. And you mentioned Jung. I happen to have a dear friend who's a Jungian analyst. She's now retired. And we've talked about this a lot. And the idea of collective unconscious, I just didn't like that because I don't believe there's anything that's not conscious that's important. And ultimately, except for the words, the ideas I just told you about here, though not the physics of the ZPE, zero point energy field, she said, yeah, that's really a lot like what Jung was saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think this is, especially, as you were talking, I could see drawings in my head. You probably present that in your books.
My question is about consciousness. What about when you're sleeping? Are you conscious or unconscious? What is that information you're accessing?
Which you?
when you are asleep. What have you researched that information? Because that's half of our lives, or a good percentage of our lives, are spent in this unconscious state. So what does that mean?
That is really a beautiful question. Now, let me give you as far as I've ever gotten with that, and I have thought about that. We have people who do dream remote viewing. They do dream associative remote viewing. They go to sleep and they have an intention we give people what's called a coordinate to describe what they're going to see the next day, say. And I think most of us have gone to sleep with a problem and had a dream or woke up suddenly with an answer. I know I have. So there's a lot of connection with this deep subconscious that goes on with dreaming. And yet there does seem to be an aspect when you disappear. You suddenly have that dream. And I think that's as close as we ever get to being one, if you will, with the UCC. Nirvana. There are people who have tried to describe that, and of course words don't describe it, but they get to this deep, deep, deep state, which is like a nirvana state. They are one with the UCC. In fact, they disappear and almost become the UCC. And I think those portions of, and it is in linear time because we know we don't dream, 8 hours while we're asleep. And yet the brainwave stuff is still going on, but we do seem to be at the lowest level of consciousness that I think we ever experience. And I think that's when we're as close as ever to the UCC. I have let me make one other point because you referred to this. There's this illusion of separateness. Remember, you can't have any boundaries in the UCC. And yet we think things are separate all the time. I'm looking at my computer screen and it looks like it's one thing, but that's an illusion. It's exact boundary if you get down to small places not known. It's giving out all kinds of radiation that's associated with it. It's an illusion of separateness. That is maintained by entanglement energy, which is a quantum mechanical term, but it means just what it sounds like. The UCC is entangled with every molecule in this screen, and in a holistic, even holographic way, it is maintaining its illusion of separateness. I think that's an important concept.
Yeah, it's in psychology. It's very much what like we call the inevitable bonding pattern between any two individuals, where each of them is like a parent to the inner child of the other. And the more they become conscious of that, the less they fall into unconscious interaction, and the more they can realize what's happening between them. But what you're calling entanglement in deep psychology is not pathology at all. It's just human interdependence. And I think everything is interdependent because it's all part of the same stuff, the same thing, and non-stuff as well.
Yeah, it's all connected for sure, but the connections are creative. I mean, what a creative physical world we have. And it all goes down to the UCC where everything is connected, but different levels of entanglement. And there's this other concept, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the eternal now, that fits in this also. All of these conscious moments are made possible because there's this eternal now that contains all of them. One person has a physical life story, but altogether, you get the eternal now of the UCC.
Yeah.
I have a question about lucid dreams. I was sleeping yesterday. All I have is the end of it, this dream, and it's like I had to get out of the place. It was like I was discovered. So I closed one door sideways, another one top down, another one from the left, and then I said, "I'm out of here," and I popped up and got out of my bed. So I physically ended that. I'm out of here. Got up and walked over to the bathroom. What was that?
Wow! And
it stuck with me, and I haven't been able to figure that out. It was like I was remote viewing. I was on a mission. They found me, and it's like I got to get out of there. And I just backed out 3 doors and jumped out of my bed. And I said,
I love that. I love that. That's a good example of lucid dreaming. Were you afraid at the time? Before you closed the door?
No, I wasn't afraid, but I realized that that they had discovered me, and I have to get out right now without any hesitation. And somehow I was closing these. I mean, these are big metal doors, one down, one left, one right. And I was blocking. They were coming, so I kept blocking them. And then, boom, the only way I could really get out was jump out of bed. And I was safe.
We had a webinar with a guy who does out-of-body experiences, but he didn't talk about the kind of lucid dream you have. Who, by the way, were you was coming in your direction? Were they ETs or?
I'll just kind of go there. My impression is it was almost like I was on a mission. I was remote viewing. I was in some kind of facility. It could have been ET. It could have been military. I'm not sure. But I knew that they could affect me even if I wasn't in my physical form. And I had to get out right now. And somehow I was able to close these doors, 1, 2, 3. But every door I closed, a part of them was getting out through, because they could slip under or slip,
Right. So you were separating yourselves. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. God, I really wish you would remote view for us, whether in dream or regular. You're clearly psychic. And see, one of the things which we tell everybody is all you're doing is remote viewing your own future. What could be safer? And what could have no ethical problems? You're not remote viewing anybody else's mind. You're remote viewing yourself in the future. And so, it's easy to feel very safe doing that. God, I would love. You've got my email address. If you want to do this, just email me and I'll get you. Okay, that'd be just so cool. And any of your other listeners, here I can give
them the address.
Yeah, it's Marty, Marty, at P like Paul dash the letter I p-a.com. So that goes back to physics, intuition, application. So p-i-a.com, Marty at. Yeah, because there are so many people out there who are indeed psychic and can do all these things, and we want to get as many of them as possible to be part of our program, because ultimately we want to educate society about all this. And the good precognitive stories we share at our webinars and workshops. I guess you have a graphic of someplace. I can't see it. But we have a May conference coming up. And Dean Radin, Joe McMonagle, the Steve Browdy I told you about, are all going to be there. Tom McNair, all these guys are remote viewers of one sort or another. Dean Radin, just a pure scientist, but he's a very well-known scientist, going back to the conscious universe. And so you can interact with these people, ask questions. It's just a marvelous.
Where is the conference being held? Is there a website or a link on your where I could get that information for your conference?
Yes. Go to Applied Precog, one word, appliedprecog.com. And right there at the top is a graphic that you can click on, and it'll give you all the details. Also, that's our website. There's just a lot of free webinars in there. There's just a lot of information on that. Applied.
Oh, nice.
Oh, did you just look at it? Good.
Yeah, I just pulled it up so I could take a look
like
at
your
it.
horse.
Yeah. So, and then once you click on that graphic with all their names, you'll see all the information. It's in Las Vegas. It's in the Green Valley Hotel and Casino, which is actually in Henderson, but all of us refer to that as Las Vegas. And this one is going to be relatively small. We only have 25 people. So you'll really be able to interact with others interested in the same field. Many of them come back every year, so they've been around for a long time. And you can ask your questions in a rather nice environment. Plus, being in Las Vegas, we are going to do 6 sporting predictions, one of which is a horse race. And we're also going to do a lotto pick. So, we mix the speakers, which makes it like a conference, with a workshop where you actually do associative remote viewing.
So I just keep getting this picture. Let's say everybody was going to concentrate on a certain horse with a certain jockey winning in a certain race and meditate on it and pray about it. Do you think they could affect the outcome?
Yes, but only sometimes. None of this seems to work all the time, and so you never know. Were you just lucky, or weren't you? See, that's why our approach is just a little different, because we can keep statistics on all this and get a feeling for what your edge over chance is. That's what we call it. So that's why we do it over and over and over again. That's why we want to have one prediction to be done every day so that you can build up the statistics rather than a onesie. You do it.
You have a hypothetical account, which is how your whole business is doing. And are you doing better than you would have if you weren't doing this?
Yes, and the answer to that is absolutely. And we have a lot of viewers who are, and our hit rate is up at about 56%. Some of the viewers are now up at 65%, and we'll see how constant they are. Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. And the challenge is for them to maintain that. We're looking for, really what we're looking for is 75% plus or minus 5%, but I'll be very happy with 70% plus or minus 5%. So that's when we can begin to I'll say it. I never used to even be able to say this, but make enough money that we can have an impact on society. Money talks to society. Hey, I'm old enough now.
Let's say you've got. What are you going to do when you get plenty of bucks and you can really do what you wanted to without being limited financially? What'll you do?
Well, and you see, I'm fortunately past that. I'm retired. I don't need any more money. My lifestyle is such that I have enough money. What I want to do is be part of the education process of society to the reality of the consciousness paradigm shift, which includes psychic phenomenon, includes all the things we've been talking about. That's what I want to do. And so I want to earn a lot of money to do that. In fact, I have a vision of starting classes where we bring in more and more people and teach them how to do this all over the country and maybe eventually all over the world.
I like it.
I think if you have a higher level vision of what you're going to do with the money, it might help people, create the money for the higher good.
Yeah, everybody knows what I just told you in our group because I mentioned it over and over again. Now, for them, many of them are much younger than I am, and they want the money for lots of different reasons, though I would say half of them don't even care about the money. They care about increasing the communication channel with this deeper part of themselves, the higher part of themselves, and their conscious mind.
Yeah, it's a growth path.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, beautiful.
Wow.
So you take people's interests, whether it's just making personal money or whatever it is, but in the course of doing that, their minds become free and they become enlightened.
We'd like to think that's the pathway. In Buddhism, what's it called? A city where it's a path towards enlightenment. But I am training people to remain in the physical world and 1 foot in the spiritual, non-physical world. And that's what I want to do. I remember way back when I used to read all of the books about this, they'd always say, hey, don't get sidetracked by the psychic stuff. You're going to experience that. Don't get sidetracked because you want to go for the pure enlightenment. I don't want to do that. And the people in our group, I think, are more than willing to stop with 1 foot in 1 foot in the physical in a very healthy way where they know
absolutely
they're connected. Exactly.
If you eschew the everyday, it'll bite you in the ass. You've got to be able to embrace the spiritual and the mundane, and to go into a fair witness and see what's appropriate for you in meeting their needs and coordinating their needs. But they're both. That's the whole thing about the spiritual path, that without awareness, where you think you've got to pare away your identifications or your egos, but that's not the case at all. What you do is you just transcend them and they become contributing parts rather than something you project out on others because you can't deal with it in yourself. So that's it. The idea of other is any dualism is what you transcend when you realize there's something that you judge in other people. That's just parts of you haven't recognized yet. And once you recognize it, you can feel your oneness again.
That's great. So you're a psychotherapist?
Yeah. You know what voice dialogue is? This is the development of Hal Stone, who studied with Jung. It's the most wonderful system of centering, embracing the opposites within you. That's how everything works. It's so cool.
Yeah, well, you really, in my opinion, are right there. You're centered. I'm sure the people you work with are assisted mightily by that. I do believe more and more people are getting this. that it's really deep. And you can see signs in movies and television. I wish somebody would do some sort of analysis of how many more movies there are that touch on the psychic. And it just seems like there are a lot more out there than there used to be. And sometimes they're not totally focused on it, but it comes up. You know, I guess I'm really thinking of a Blue Bloods now, of all things. But there was a psychic that gave information, and of course they didn't believe it, but she turned out to be right and helpful. And there are just more and more examples of that.
Yeah, I noticed there's a lot of going into a lot of the different things that you weren't hearing about 5 years ago. There were two. They looked like they were going to be about something else, and they ended up being about alien abductions. And you thought this woman was just exploring her own psychosis. It was very interesting. It's almost like everything's becoming mainstream.
What's it called?
It was called Horse Girl. Yeah. And it just left you go, what? But it was going in this other direction. It looked like a regular, movie. And all of a sudden, she's being abducted by aliens. And I don't want to give it away. It's a spoiler alert. But, if you're going to watch it, Netflix, right? Netflix. I have a question. It's a kind of personal, but it's okay. I have been piecing together, the mystery of my story. And when I moved to Oahu in 1993, it appears that I was approached by some people in Project Stargate. And looking back, it's like, yeah, that's what was going on. But in 93, who knew any of that stuff? Because they were testing my psychic abilities at a Psy-World seminar, which was people synergistically interconnected or something. It was a bunch of these Tony Robbins type seminars, but they were actually doing remote viewing and trying to filter out the people that were psychic. Have you ever heard of whoever these people are trying to recruit psychics, and they're going to these spiritual events and consciousness events and, testing you? I realized they were testing me. It's like, my God.
I never heard of it quite that specifically, but I know they spent a lot of resources on putting together questionnaires and things of that sort to try to identify what characteristics would be best for remote viewing, and they use them. So it would not surprise me if they also went out to places like this and they asked you to do remote viewing, or was it just a questionnaire?
No, they had all these little exercises you did, and so they would break you into smaller groups. They said, now we're going to visualize, and they gave you a target, and then they were, and it was like, well, later I found out what that was, but back in 93, I didn't know what that was. And then they invited me to their private group, and they did more of the target stuff. And so,
no, that could have been them. It could have been them, and it would have been better if they identified themselves in some way. Who did they say they were?
Psi seminars, and then it was a subgroup of. It was a spiritual church, and they disbanded. I was there about a year and a half, 2 years, and they disbanded the church. It's like they got what they wanted, and they said, okay, we're breaking it up. But it's kind of a personal story. I just kept getting contacted. Eventually got contacted by the military. Eventually in a military base, and a lot of things happened there, which I don't want to take up the time on this show. But it's where I start realizing, I was picked by Project Stargate. That's basically what my conclusion was. And I just wondered, and then I have a friend that similar things happened to her. So I just wanted to, you're in this field. Have you heard them,
not that
coming
specific.
In something else. Yeah, and they're just
not that specifically. And I don't know for sure if it was the government. I've never been a part of that. It wouldn't surprise me if some branch was doing that. maybe even on their own, or somebody who understood that remote viewing could be used and wanted to get to use for their own purposes. One of the things about us is we are totally open, as you can see. And that's why I'd like you and bring some of your friends that were part of that into this program. We're just looking for people who are psychic, want to be able to, and have no problem, what can I say, going after money or just going after deepening their connection, knowing that there is a money component. But the money component is to help them and educate society. But I really do hope you will join us. And if there were others that were taken into that program, they must have been psychic as well. Have them join us. And
I know several people that are very accurate psychics. Nobody's 100%, but high level of accuracy. So I will talk to. I have several friends. Yeah. Okay, I will. I promise I will. I'll talk.
Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. And you'll email me. That's terrific. This paradigm shift, I really do get a sense. Now, maybe it's a psychic sense. I can point to a few things, including the disclosure, the fact that the government is willing to disclose all this about ETs. The abduction stories, I've heard a lot of them, even from somebody who I highly respect, back to when she was a child. What I'm not 100% clear on is whether or not it's consciousness, a telepathic consciousness story, or whether they were really brought up to an alien spaceship. Though I guess there's some cases where they're embedded items. I've heard that, but I don't know for sure if that's true. But there's so many stories. There's definitely something going on with that, in my opinion.
It's interesting. There's no need to assume there's only one reality, too.
Right?
that alternate perceptions have a reality, too, which may not feel as immediate to you, but you can focus on it and make it larger. And the other thing is, when you make up something, where do you make it from? Where does the images come from? It's part of the Akashic records that basically we've been talking about. And, back in your dream, Janet, I would wonder if there was a part of me, if it was my dream, that was after another part.
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that's down another part? Does that ring any bells at all?
Absolutely.
Not that I can recall right now, but we'll look at that later.
Okay, but yeah. Let me give you what might be going on. In quantum mechanics, until something becomes measured, and a measurement is really just another way of talking about a conscious moment, right? These electrons can have a probability of being in many places. It's like a fuzzy cloud now. Nobody in the physics world now thinks of an electron as being solid like they used to, right? There was a nucleus that was solid, and then there was solid electron. No. It's all probabilities. Well, in the UCC, you have probable futures, probable pasts. They're still there, right? The UCC never forgets anything. Your now moment is there in the future. So maybe you're connecting up in some way with a probable past or a probable future. You asked me. That's what popped into my head.
I would add, in psychotherapy, there's There's always a here and now at this very moment, a resonance in your childhood, a resonance in the past life, or books you like, or movies you like, or archetypes that appeal to you that resonates right through the entire universe at every level of consciousness. It's all part of the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And notice some of them resonate more, mostly because in the moment, there are like more emotions involved. We don't talk that much about emotions, but isn't that the kind of thing that will trigger you to go back there? It's because it had a strong emotional content. And even like you said, a great book that you really loved, you'll remember it better because you really enjoyed it. You really loved it. And I think that's the kind of primary emotion that when it comes from the UCC and comes out into the physical world is where the entanglement energy is the greatest, when it has more emotion associated with it.
How do we know if anything's real?
You're starting out with an assumption that there's real and unreal. That's you're killing your inquiry before you start.
No, I want to answer that because it's very clear to me. The only thing you know for 100% sure is real is this moment. That moment. You cannot doubt that moment. You know, a week from now, you might kind of think back about what we did here, and you might not remember that moment, but the current moment that you're experiencing is absolutely 100% real. Your memory of it may change, but in the UCC, it won't change. It'll be the exact moment that you experienced. I know people totally won't focus on the now moment being as real as I just stated, and yet I don't think anybody would disagree with it. There's nothing more real than the now moment that you're experiencing. An event is just a series of now moments. And then I alluded to the fact that your life story is nothing but a longer series of now moments that starts at the moment of conception. The UCC, however, that moment of conception occurred, the UCC is down there. It's down there doubling cells. Then you get born and you have all kinds of experiences, all in individual, connected now moments. You go from one now moment to another, and eventually you get through your life's now moments, and then you get to the eternal now of every sentient being's now moments. And it's more than sentient being, to tell you the truth, in my opinion. Matter has now moments, right? It's coming through the zero-point energy field, the vacuum energy field. So it has its own now moments at a very different time frame. The earth has now moments. Anything which you want to sort of bring out as being a thing experiences now moments because it's connected to the UCC.
And then there's the humanity tends to try to get it on one reality, one consensus reality, based on, I don't know, something that's driving them, and they're uncomfortable if you're not on their reality. So they're always saying to you, that's not real, or that is real. Get real, come down to earth, right? And so we have the Christian consensus reality, we have the Muslim consensus reality, and we have the American consensus reality. What do you think that's about? Is that actually creating a reality by making that the operating system that is the only one that applies for this collective group, like Americans or Christians or Jews or whatever? Doesn't that affect what's going on by all these people focused on one thought, idea, and process?
Well, absolutely. And I don't know why the word brainwashing came in, but a lot of this is that, but again, it starts as childhood. Money. Okay. You get your ideas of money. Money is evil. People who have a lot of money must have gotten it in terrible ways. You go to your particular church with your parents. So your parents make it a good thing to do. It's just the way it is. And some churches are better at attracting adherents. But that's just the way it is. What we don't have enough of, and I think this will be part of the consciousness paradigm shift, is independent thought by getting the information from your own deep self. Do I really believe what my preacher or Muslim teacher or whatever is telling me? I originally believed it because my parents made it so important. But at some point in time, you need to come to think about and feel about these things yourself. Our society definitely doesn't do enough of that. Look at advertising. I rest my case. They can sell us anything.
Yeah. And we have about 3 more minutes, but I have one final question. What about entheogens? An ayahuasca trip. These people. Have you tried any kind of remote viewing when it's assisted with an entheogen?
I haven't. I know people who have, and as far as I know, the heavier the drug, the worse they do because they don't care. You go off into another place. Again, you're heading towards the pure spiritual. But as far as I know, let's say things like grass, marijuana, I don't know anybody who's done it consistently and has a super good hit rate. I mean, I don't have anything against it in principle, unless it's unhealthy. But anyway, I do not know of it being successful. Now, I know the Indians, the American Indians, used it, and they were able to get their consciousness to merge with an eagle and see things that the eagle would see. You hear all these stories, and yes, some people will use artificial chemicals to reach a state, and they've learned to do it and integrate it in a way which works for them. But I haven't had anybody in my experience do that.
Yeah, because they used to call it a vision quest. They're going to go on a spiritual journey and, find your destiny, what your mission is while you came to this earth or something. Yeah. So anyway, I just wondered, I thought that was probably an aspect of it. I know they're proving a lot of the things, entheogen classes for, they used to use them back in the 60s, and then they got criminalized, but they're using them for healing
like
and
LSD.
Yeah, another.
Right. No, and that stuff is usually for a spiritual quest. What we're doing is more 1 foot in the physical, 1 foot in the spiritual.
Okay, final minute to you. Wrap it up. What do you want to tell our listeners?
Consciousness is fundamental. Building up a communication channel with the deepest part of yourself or a higher part of yourself, something which is much grander than you usually think of yourself in the physical world, is a marvelous thing to do. And that's the path which we're encouraging at appliedprecog.com.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you, listeners. Thank you.
Aloha.
Thomas Becker. Aloha, love and blessings.